Hey everyone, welcome back to Unfulfilled. I'm your host, Camille. I'm so grateful that you've tuned in today. Today, we're going to talk about the fine line between being positive or optimistic versus being naive or delusional. I find this a really interesting topic to think about and question to ask because I think often a lot of us feel like we have to be grouped in either the optimist or the realist category. There's I feel like not as much of a gray area. You're kind of just grouped into one of those buckets. Either you're overly positive and optimistic, meaning you're delusional and not being realistic and considering the facts, or the other way around. Like you're always negative because you're being super pessimistic and realistic about life and always having your guard up about things. But I don't think it's so black and white. And I don't think we necessarily have to fall into one of these buckets. Like anything in life, I think it's a spectrum. So that's what we're going to dive into today. If you know me, you know that I tend to always choose to lean towards the positive side and be optimistic about life. That just is personally where I tend to sway. And so naturally, I find myself having high expectations or getting my hopes up about things because I always do choose to see the best in a person or a situation. And maybe that's a bit of my personality type. Maybe it's what I've learned serves me. But of course, taking this stance, definitely been instances, many instances where it's led me to feel disappointed or let down because life never goes exactly as we think or hope it will in our heads. So, a specific instance recently that was the primary influence in my talking about this today is the classic example of getting your hopes up about a guy or girl you're seeing. So recently I got my hopes up about a guy in my life, thinking that it was going one direction and feeling really excited and positive about where things were going, naturally, as girls tend to do. Creating this story in my head about a future with this person, putting him on a pedestal, and then suddenly ended out of the blue, catching me really off guard, leaving me wondering if I was being overly optimistic or a bit delusional about where things were going with us. Or did I have a good head on my shoulders and he just suddenly changed his mind and things just took a turn really quickly? So it just got me to thinking whether I was neglecting to consider these red flags or maybe like negative qualities about this person because I had tunnel vision on seeing a future with them and wanting it to work. So, although this is primarily what fuels my inspiration for today's episode, this balance of optimism versus delusion can be applied to absolutely any instance in all of our lives. So, today we're going to unpack, is there a time when it's better to be optimistic and keep our hopes high versus a time when it's best to have our guard up and be a bit skeptical? And what does a healthy balance look like here? And is getting our hopes up and choosing to be optimistic a good thing, or will it always lead us to not seeing red flags and not having our guard up and protecting ourselves? So to start, here's why I think being optimistic and seeing the glass as half full and having big hopes and dreams is a good thing, and why I always tend to lean towards this way of thinking. So I truly believe, especially as of late and as time goes on, that our thoughts become things. Our energy is everything, and the energy and the thoughts that we choose to have are what we're going to manifest in our lives. So if you've read The Secret, this is the whole premise of the book. And ultimately, very high level, the thoughts that we have and what we choose to believe, that's what's going to become our reality. We have to maintain positive thoughts, keep a positive high frequency in order to attract the things that we want in life. So the idea is that if we have these thoughts that make us feel good, then we give out this positive energy, and energy is everything, because whatever we put out is what comes back to us. So if we want good things to come into our lives, if we want to attract the things that we've always wanted, it starts with choosing to have and believe positive thoughts, to think about what we want in life, not what we don't want. Because the more we think about what we want, the more we attract those things into our lives. And the same applies on the flip side about things we don't want. If we're constantly dwelling and thinking about all the things we don't want in life, we're going to attract those things in. It's all frequency and energy. And the energy and frequency that we feel comes from the story that we tell ourselves. I also just think that people give off a much happier and more attractive energy when they choose to be positive. Nobody wants to be surrounded by the people who are always pointing out the negative and always dragging others down around them because they're pointing out the things that don't make us feel good. They're always pointing out the negative. Optimism and positivity are the high frequency states, and those are the things that attract people and wonderful things into our lives. Whereas skepticism and negativity, are those lower frequency states. Those are the more closed off points of view. And that's not what is going to attract good things into our lives. So on the opposite end of the spectrum, if we choose to always be skeptical, if we always choose to dwell on the negative, always be on the lookout for the red flags, always be preparing ourselves for disappointment and letdown, that's a pretty unexciting and sad way to live our lives. If we're not letting ourselves get excited about life and optimistic about the future and what it might bring, then it takes all the fun out of life. But at the same time, we don't want to allow ourselves to be delusional and totally unrealistic by only being positive and optimistic in every single situation. We have to find that balance. And that, of course, is what we're going to dive into today, how to find that balance of maintaining that high energy and optimism and positivity in life while also being a healthy amount of realistic. So to set the scene even further, I don't think optimism and positivity have to mean that you're delusional or unrealistic. As I mentioned in the beginning, people often think that it's a black or white situation, that you have to be grouped in one bucket or the other. Either you're an optimist or a pessimist. Either you're realistic or unrealistic. But there's a big gray area, and a healthy balance can definitely be attained. I think the reason that people think that you have to be grouped into one bucket or the other is because, sure, the people who tend to be more realistic and skeptical about life tend to dwell on the negative and always be on the lookout for red flags. Therefore, they don't tend to radiate that positivity or point out the positives in life, but rather they're always kind of on the lookout and protecting themselves. And on the flip side, the people who always tend to be positive and optimistic, they don't dwell on the negative and they don't point out those things. So it's easy to assume that they don't consider what's realistic and that maybe they're not considering the facts. But let's get specific. Let's look at the definition between being an optimist and being a realist. An optimist is a person who tends to be hopeful and confident about the future or the success of something. And the definition of a realist is a person who accepts a situation as it is and is prepared to deal with it accordingly. So, given these two definitions, we can be hopeful and confident about the future and accept things as they are and prepare ourselves accordingly. So while I do believe it's very important to be positive, and as I mentioned, I choose to maintain positive thinking and really try to always stay in that high frequency state. And I think that's important to manifest and live our best lives. I think it's also really good and important to be realistic at the same time. The thesis here is that I do think there is a balance that we should strike where we can be both. I like the idea of combining the two and calling it optimistic realism. So what does this look like? First, we need to be sure that we're considering and honoring the facts about the person or the situation. We can always choose to see the glass half full and allow ourselves to get excited about life and optimistic about the future, while also considering all the facts and not ignoring the red flags or warnings that we should be looking out for. I think if we're so optimistic or hopeful about something or someone, that leads us to literally ignore or avoid truths about the situation. I think that's when you stray into the delusional category. We all have those friends who ignore all the horrible behavior of their significant other and only choose to see the good in them because they want it to work so badly or because they're scared of being alone. That, yes, that I would agree is a bit naive and delusional and probably not great for a relationship or a situation. But if you consider the facts and maintain a realistic head on your shoulders, then I think getting hopeful and feeling optimistic and positive about where things are going is definitely not a harmful or bad thing by any means. It just means that you're leaning into the fullness and excitement of life. And that's the whole purpose of life, is to feel happy and excited about things. One way to look at this balanced mindset is to hope for the best, but also be prepared for the worst. It allows us to protect ourselves enough, but not do it so much where we have our guard up and totally prevent ourselves from getting excited and feeling happy and optimistic about life. So my second point and suggestion here, another really important thing to consider, if we're super optimistic and positive about a certain outcome in life, if we really want that outcome to happen, we have to be sure that we're taking action towards it. I think it can be a bit delusional if we think that something will happen if we don't work towards it at all. It's not going to just come into existence by only thinking it into existence. Like, you can't just have these thoughts, practice manifesting these positive thoughts, and then just sit on the couch all day and do absolutely nothing about it, or then intentionally like self-destruct a relationship or whatever it is. We have to actually act in alignment with those thoughts. So ultimately, we need to couple our optimism with effort. I think optimism is a great motivator to fuel our efforts to continue to bring us towards achieving what we want in life. Because if we're optimistic that our efforts will lead to that outcome, it'll keep us going. So to sum these two up, we want to choose to see the world through that positive and hopeful lens, but we don't want to be blind to red flags or naive to the things that might be harmful to us. And additionally, we need to continue our momentum and action towards achieving those dreams, those things that we want in life. So back to the situation I described earlier. It's really easy to take a situation like this where we're left feeling hurt and blame ourselves for letting our guard down or getting too vulnerable too soon or not having seen things clearly. We blame ourselves a lot of the time. And those were my immediate thoughts when I experienced this recently. I started to analyze and question all the positive signs that I was reading into and beating myself up a bit for getting my hopes up too soon and for being optimistic about where things were going rather than maybe being a little bit more cautious and looking out for red flags or anything like that. But honestly, I didn't see any red flags that were clear to me in the moment. After a lot of reflection, I really don't think I was being delusional for feeling hopeful and excited about the situation because ultimately I was led to feel a certain way. And I definitely wasn't avoiding or ignoring any signs or signals. I considered the facts about how things were going, about his actions, and I felt good about it. And I let myself get excited because I was excited and optimistic about how things were going and how I was made to feel by them. But ultimately, I don't live in that person's head. I don't know what they're thinking, and I can't read their mind. All I could do was look at the facts, look at how they're acting towards me, and see the way things were going from a positive and realistic stance. And my positive feelings about the situation reflected that. And then after thinking more about it, if I chose to be extra skeptical and have this big wall up between us, always looking out for red flags and not letting myself get optimistic or excited, it would have had the same outcome regardless, right? The fact is, it wasn't meant to work out with this person. But if I chose to take that stance, seeing the glass half empty, being a bit more of a pessimist, a realist, and only analyzing the red flags, it would have taken all the fun and excitement out of it. So it wouldn't have worked out with them regardless. And then I wouldn't have nearly enjoyed the relationship as much while it lasted. All the light, happy memories throughout that time together would have been tainted by this negative light that I was projecting if I chose to live in that negative frequency state. If I didn't allow myself to be vulnerable and to get excited and develop feelings, then it would have taken so much of the beauty out of that experience and it wouldn't have been nearly as fun. So this leads me to my next point that I want us all to consider is being vulnerable and exposing ourselves to potential disappointment will always be a part of life. Life never goes exactly as we think it will. It's unavoidable that we're sometimes going to be disappointed or let down, especially when we let ourselves get our hopes up about something. But I don't think disappointment means that we let our guard down or that we're at fault for allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. Sure, that choosing to always expect disappointment and always be on the guard up for letdowns, it might prepare us a little more for them when they come because we told ourselves that it would end like that. Maybe it removes the element of surprise when it comes to disappointment. But I 100% believe that living with this mindset, always expecting disappointment and always having that wall up and always just living to protect ourselves, I think it's just going to invite more disappointment and unwanted outcomes into our lives. So since disappointment and surprise will always happen in life, no matter how much we try to avoid it, how can we return to optimism and positivity in navigating these letdowns? So when we consider and process the change of events realistically, we process it, we accept this new reality, we can then choose to be optimistic about other doors that this may open or all the exciting things that this change is creating space for. So again, back to this boy situation, just for full circle, the fact is I wasn't meant to end up with this person. I fully have accepted that fact, and I'm not choosing to ignore that fact and circumstance that came to light. There was an expiration date that was meant to happen, and I'm very aware of that. But I don't regret letting myself get excited and optimistic during our time together because it was fun and I felt happy and I wasn't being delusional in it. I maintained a healthy balance of getting excited, having fun, letting myself get feelings while also being aware of any red flags and not really seeing any. Being vulnerable and staying positive about things allowed me to channel that excitement and happiness during that time. So, yes, of course, I was left a bit disappointed and caught off guard when things took a turn and didn't turn out as expected. But disappointment and hurt feelings will always come, but they'll always pass with time. And once I let myself accept the new facts and come out on the other side of it, accepting that it wasn't meant to be, I came out stronger and even more resilient. And on the other side, I chose to return to optimism, to seeing the glass half full, recognizing that this situation ending was only going to create space for something or someone bigger and better in my life, something that is actually meant to be, or another wonderful experience that is in my future. Whereas if I chose to maintain skepticism or negativity coming out of the situation, my view would be that all boys suck, and I would take a victim mentality and then be probably hesitant to enter into any other relationship moving forward out of protection or fear. And again, if I chose to move forward with that glass half empty mindset, with extra skepticism, and to be negative moving forward coming out of it, then I would just attract more relationships that weren't going to work. I would attract more disappointment into my life moving forward. If we constantly live in skepticism and look out for negatives in life just to protect ourselves all the time, we won't let ourselves fully experience the fullness and beauty and excitement of life. So being vulnerable is just a part of it. And if we lean into optimism and positivity, we can experience all the great things that life has to offer, and I believe attract more of it into our lives. And yeah, this means being vulnerable at times and experiencing some disappointment and letdowns and surprises. But we can process those changes, look at the new facts, and choose to move forward with optimism and positivity while also being realistic and continue to take action, always returning to this optimistic realism. Always returning to this healthy balance, choosing optimism and positivity while considering the facts, while continuing to take action and allowing our optimism to fuel that action. We always come back stronger and we always are bringing ourselves closer towards what's really meant for us. So, how can you start to practice optimistic realism today? How can you find that balance and lean into vulnerability? It is not a negative thing to allow yourself to get excited, to have feelings, to get your hopes up. Ultimately, whatever is meant for us in life won't pass us by. And again, life's going to be pretty damn boring if we always have our guard up and don't let ourselves feel and have fun. So that is all for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of Unfulfilled. I'm so grateful that you took this time for yourself to learn, to grow, and to live a more fulfilling life. I would love it if you sent this to a friend or family member who you thought of during this episode or who would love the show. And again, follow or subscribe wherever you are listening. And I'll see you all again soon on your journeys to becoming more fulfilled.